But I wanted to just frame some of the discussion before we bring everybody else on. And thank you for being here, and also in what probably could have been seen as a hostile environment for this discussion. And I did want to remind everybody that yes, Dr. Mukkamala is, first of all, practices an independent practice in Flint, Michigan, where I know he's very dedicated to all of the public health disasters that are that have occurred there, and health equity in that way. And just draw the differentiation that you are here representing the American Medical Association, but what you have said does not necessarily represent your views. But I appreciate the deep understanding of where the AMA stands. And so from that component, I wanted to just sort of frame our conversation as we move forward. It seems like within the AMA and other specialty societies, there is the thought that we need to watch, see where things go, decide if private equity is or could be good or bad. And it seems to be in stark contrast to the profession of law, which we all have pretty different opinions about attorneys. And some of us might think they don't have the highest professional ethics, perhaps, yet this is a black and white subject within their profession, that a non-attorney, non-lawyer should not own a portion of a legal practice, not even a small amount. You did mention that the hospitals might own practices, and so might insurance companies. And when we speak about the corporate practice of medicine, it would apply to those as well, albeit depending on the state exactly how it's applied. Now, I will say we haven't talked about the payment system here very much, but in law, there's not really a legal insurance that we all expect to have. There's no universal legal financial coverage other than maybe a public defender. And so the dynamics are different with that profession. But ultimately, and as you mentioned, with physicians selling their practices because running one is so difficult, there is that underlying force of the complex and broken payment system. So I think we're probably all in agreement on that one. But I wanted to bring in some the rest of the panel for this discussion. And one other point I just wanted to frame this with is that in the AMA report, the benefits listed, the potential benefits of private equity involvement is that they might include financially lucrative deals for physicians looking to exit ownership of their practices, which I would argue is the largest, most influential potential benefit. And those are going to be enjoyed by those leaving the practice of medicine. And you mentioned the generational divide. So it seems like that benefit is disproportionately playing out as far as physicians that are leaving the entire profession. And that, I think, is what makes it really difficult to feel like the American Medical Association represents us if it's largely those who are leaving medicine who are making some of that policy. And of course, I know it's not the there is representation from younger physicians here. So without further ado, let me just do a quick introduction to the other panelists. And my Mr. Sailesh Kanda, you just saw him as a dermatologist, has done a lot of research on private equity and dermatology. Dr. McNamara has spoke multiple times today, Chief Medical Officer of the American Academy of Emergency Medicine Physician Group, which is suing Envision for illegal corporate practice of medicine. And Dr. Ben Aiken is actually a direct primary care physician in Western North Carolina, an innovator in terms of payment models. I consider direct primary care to be sort of a hard reset of the U.S. healthcare system. It doesn't fix everything by itself, but it does show how affordable medical care is and primary care is when we take out all of the parasites and third parties. Dr. Leah Colucci is a emergency physician resident at Yale and the AAEM, American Academy of Emergency Medicine Resident Student Association president. Glad she could be here today because I think she's on call for the ICU, I think. And then Dr. Marco Fernandez, president of Midwest Anesthesia Partners, which is a private anesthesia group, and also the president of the Association of Independent Medicine. So thank you all for joining us. And Let me let Dr. Mukkamala have a moment to respond to sort of my introduction there, and then we'll work around.
Sure. Yeah. No, thanks. I guess what I would say about the voting entities that sort of make up the AMA, and whether that, I mean, it was sort of suggested that maybe it's a top heavy or senior heavy body that comes up with these policies. And that's why we are not defending private equity, but sort of wanting to maintain it as an option for those physicians that want to explore it to be explored, right? What I will say about that policymaking body, so we had about, I don't know, maybe about 200 some items of business at this meeting just this past week that got decided, that ended yesterday. And about 60 of them were from the medical student section and the young physician section, right? So it's not something that is, in fact, if anything, I would say that it's early career weighted, not late career weighted. So it's not, I guess, to suggest that it's a bunch of people that are about to leave the practice that want to defend their ability to get a check for a couple of $1 million when they leave. That's not who's voting on this policy, right? It's almost medical student and young physician heavy as far as who's creating this policy. But I guess what we're taking is a neutral approach to basically say this is what could be good about it and this is what could be bad about it. So for example, is there a private equity entity that basically invests in a practice as a minority owner that basically allows me to go out and update my microscope and the things that I reconstruct an eardrum with, something that I wouldn't be able to afford on my own, given that my payroll costs have gone up by 20% in the aftermath of COVID, that doesn't affect my ability to do that procedure or tell me how many I need to do in a day? Sure, those entities exist, and that should be an option. But is there another relationship where they're saying you only saw 10 patients or you only did 10 procedures today, we need you to do 20 to get our payout? Absolutely, that could exist and does exist as well. That's absolutely what we're not defending.
Well, the statements and the actions, don't reflect, I think, the sentiment of most of the folks that are involved with Take Medicine Back. I understand, the policies, the House of Delegates, trying to be the Big Ten, and we ran into this in emergency medicine, and what it wound up is, the formation of another organization, the American Academy of Emergency Medicine, now Take Medicine Back as multi-specialty on the issues, because it's, I'm a long-standing AMA member since, I think, my residency program, and I've been involved with the county. I was on the board of trustees of the Pennsylvania Medical Society, and I realized that, it is the most powerful organization in medicine, and we have to try to change it from within. But it's fairly clear that statements, we want to have space for it, is a problem, because it is, the AMA should be willing, and I know this is not you personally, I'm talking organizationally, the disconnect here is it's not saying private equity should not be making medical decisions, doing this, doing that. It's saying physicians should be free to choose whatever they do. And that includes selling out the PE, being a sham owner of a professional association that PE uses, which we discussed earlier, the front professional association, completely controlled with these stock transfer restriction agreements. That's what I think people would want to see from the AMA, that if PE is going to come in and you're going to control PE, which we know they won't allow, because I've gone to PE conferences as a fly on the wall. Celeste spoke at one that I attended, and that's clearly what the message from them was. Doctors think they have control, but we actually control the ship here. So I believe we shouldn't be involved with them at all. But if the AMA made a statement saying, PE with absolutely no control is okay, PE won't come in, I would be okay with that. But you need to say that the medical practices, we should be as ethical as the lawyers, is what Mitch initially put there. Lay influence in the practice of medicine is destructive to the physician-patient relationship. So, as a long-standing AMA member, courage for you coming here. I don't know if you know, but there's hostility in the comments. And I think it's the frustration we have of what we've just heard about how PE has devastated medicine, the physicians who practice it, EM's burning out, docs are leaving mid-career. We just heard the same thing from derm, and Celeste went over all the other specialties. So it's little frustrated with the organization, a lot frustrated with the organization stance and willingness to do anything. You know, we're a small professional society and we're putting all of our reserves in the suit against Envision in the state of California. And that's what I think we need from organized medicine. So I'll get off the soapbox and thank you again for coming.
No, I appreciate those comments, but I guess I don't know how to put it more clearly, but you know, one of the things that I highlighted in this report by the Council on Medical Service, that physicians should retain the responsibility for clinical governance, patient welfare and outcomes. Clinical autonomy is something that is critical to any relationship, right? And that is pretty much exactly what you're saying, is that as it relates to taking care of patients, all of those decisions should lie solely with the physicians and not their partner that's providing financial assistance to their practice. That is clearly in our guidelines. Anything that's a departure from that is something that we would absolutely not defend and fight. And so when we see examples of that, like for example, the price gouging that private equity is trying to do as it relates to the wake of the No Surprises Act, I stood in front of Congress and basically said that is not at all what the AMA is defending.
So if I can, so I appreciate all this discussion response, and I think I got a couple things because I also want to make sure we get around to all the panelists, especially while you're still here. I think what you just said about these groups or the AMA saying that we should retain autonomy, clinical autonomy, I think we all agree with that one. I think what we're kind of not seeing eye to eye on is that by definition, when you sell to private equity, you give away the autonomy, the clinical decision-making. There's really no gray area there. Now, I guess
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mitch, but I guess we don't make that assumption, right? That just because you have a corporate partner doesn't mean you're giving up clinical autonomy. That you can have a corporate partner and not give up the ability to make clinical decisions.
And I guess a different language as partner versus owner, and one of those is directly true. Let me go to Sailesh Kanda, and then I wanted to go to Leah Colucci after with a question.
I just want to chime in on a couple of those things. Like one, the autonomy thing. The problem is there's two sides of the coin here. If you're losing autonomy, but you also have to sign a non-disparagement or non-disclosure agreement, most of these people are scared of coming forward and actually discussing what's going on. As you referred earlier to, Bobby, you have the MSO and the PMC, and this will be a stark line dividing the two entities. But in actuality, we hear plenty of reports. I have dermatologists come to me around the country and reach out to me with their stories. We have reports of people being asked to freeze AKs when they want to be frozen for actinic keratoses. Some they're bringing all melanoma patients in for a skin check, even though it's not time to come in for a skin check. Pressure to do biopsies and send for stains, extra procedures. And these are things that even in a big data set study, you're not going to see these things happen in a huge data set study all the time. And if you're losing autonomy, you're not allowed to speak about it. How do you rectify the two? And the second thing about minority investors, at least in dermatology, out of the 40 groups we have or have had in the past, all of them had a majority investor. And even hypothetically, it's only a minority investor. At some point, that PE group's going to want to get their money back. And 5, 7 years, whatever, they're going to flip to another group. One of our largest groups in dermatology is now worth between $1 and $2 billion right now at 15 times EBITDA, which is already a huge valuation, as you know. Who's the next buyer going to be? And once they sell to a higher percentage or higher EBITDA, they got to squeeze even more money. It has to come from somewhere. So if you tell me at the first flip that you can find a minority investor and coast along and no problems, I actually would agree with you. But if you tell me the second flip and third flip and beyond, there's not going to be anyone pulling strings, that's where it becomes hard to believe. And we're seeing that happen in dermatology. So,
right. So again, what we're saying is that physicians should not allow their strings to be pulled, right? So when you're talking about all of a sudden private equity comes in and the number of biopsies double and there's still a physician that's managing that practice and it's not a non-physician, that is wrong, right? We're not disagreeing that that's wrong.
Yeah,
right? That is a negative consequence and a negative impact of private equity on patient care that is disastrous, right? And to the economics of healthcare, to the outcome of patients. That is not at all what we're defending.
So that's a really good.
But if you're married, you have kids or a spouse or whoever, and you have bought a house you have a non-compete 20-mile radius, not just that one office, but all the offices in that region. People are stuck, and we hear this all the time. So that's just my 2 cents. Even though a physician says, I don't agree with this, and my ethics don't line with this in patient care, sometimes people feel trapped, and that's the hard part.
Right. So that's why we're asking those contracts should be reviewed before signing, right? Before you engage. All those highlights that I put in there, and then you'll see them in those links. Before you go down this road with private equity, these are the things to maintain that will allow you to maintain that clinical autonomy and leave if the subsequent owner isn't as good as the first owner that you sort of partnered with, and now they're pushing you to do something you don't want to do. Don't sign a contract that makes you move 50 miles away from where your kids are in school. Right. That's exactly what we're asking people to look out for.
I think it's a really good transition to one thing I wanted to bring up and bring in Leah Colucci, who's our essentially our young physician here. I'm getting out of that category. When you mentioned that there are young physicians at the American Medical Association, I was one of them. I was the co-chair of my medical school's organized medical medicine department, delegate and alternate delegate, and several times at the AMA. I would argue that there's sort of a biphasic distribution where there are an awful lot of young physicians that are AMA members automatically, and then there's the older physicians, and those younger physicians are very impressionable because we look up to our mentors and we think that these are people we should be following the example of. So we're both naive and we are vulnerable, extra vulnerable at that time in our career. So in the part where we talked about the benefits of financially lucrative deals, I'm not saying that there aren't young physicians there. It's just that the benefits disproportionately benefit people who are leaving medicine. So I wanted to get Dr. Colucci's perspective on this, because if a physician is told we should look at the deal before we leave, usually when a physician is signing those deals, they only have to stay around 2 more years. And then it's the younger generation that's left to pick up the pieces with no autonomy or decision-making about the deal that already happened.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and I had dropped it in the chat, a lot of young physicians, I mean, even my own co-residents, and I'm incredibly vocal, will, maybe have a different conversation with me in private, but they are scared sometimes to talk out. I've had some of the current 4th years at my program that are getting jobs at places that are CMG run that, are coming to me being like, I didn't realize, because I was, sheltered by residency, how many like HCA programs and vision, all of those things there are. And now I don't know what to do. And I don't have anybody that's actually giving me education on what I should be looking for in those contracts. And not all programs are created equal. I do know that there's some wonderful residency programs out there that are teaching their residents the billing practices and the scary things to look for, but most of us aren't. And then some of us that are getting, speaking out are being threatened. One of my co-residents as a medical student wrote a pretty scathing review on private equity prior to the match, and was contacted by multiple leaders in our specialty saying, you need to remove these articles, or your one leadership position that you're holding in emergency medicine right now will be revoked, which it ultimately was. And 2, you will not match. I was told on more than one occasion from speaking out, you will not match. And then now, because I'm very vocal and have written articles and stuff, I've had other physicians say, just be careful, because when you're looking for a job, what if your family is in a place that wants an HCA, or what if, you're at a program that gets bought out? And I'm probably blacklisted at some places now, and it is what it is. But when you're being told that as a young doctor, and you have all of these loans and everything that you're $300,000+ in debt, which I don't even know what the average is now for debt, but people get scared. And so they will, do whatever they can. And then this problem that emergency medicine is really dealing with right now, for those of you that aren't in emergency medicine, I'm sure you've heard about our absolutely awful match, is we are having this exploding expansion of residency programs that are being run by private equity backed groups. So now we're having residents where their entire education is coming from these private equity backed groups. So we can't even protect those residents, because they're literally at a program that's telling them this is what their life is supposed to be like. Their attendings are, being run by these contracts. And so, I have my own personal opinions. I'm trying to educate as many medical students as I can about, when you're going through the match process, to look at these programs. But we also have a lot of residents that anonymously reach out to RSA saying, I'm at a PE-backed program and my attendings are so focused on their RVUs and so focused on these things that they have to do on shift and within their contracts, I'm not being taught. And they don't know who to speak out to. They don't know who else to report to. And honestly, if they're going to stay anonymous, like we really can't from RSA protect those residents and students in a lot of cases. And neither can the other organizations that are supposed to be protecting them, like the ACGME and stuff. They have those like resident surveys, but it really has to take an entire group of residents that aren't scared to speak up at their program. And that's not what's happening.
As it relates to, there was a comment, I think, in the chat about, well, the AMA should help physicians to sort of maintain their own practice and give them the tools so that they're not seeking the shelter of private equity or hospital employment, that sort of thing. And that's exactly what we've done in our private practice physician section. And I put a link in there about all of the guidance that exists relating how to set up your practice, how to explore private practice, basically take the mystery and the fear out of that option, because that fear is what oftentimes drives people to go and seek the shelter of something that in the long term may not be healthy. There's also a link that I put in there about the AMA's position on non-compete clauses. There was something in the chat about the AMA should come out opposed to all non-compete. And so we are opposed to non-compete in certain situations. Where we're not opposed to it is where a physician group brings in and sets up somebody in practice, right, a young partner, and then pays off their debt that builds up their practice. And then that partner goes across town, right, and sets up practice. That is a good place for a non-compete. Where it's not a good place for a non-compete is when you get employed by a hospital system and then you work for them for 10 years and you're associated with them. And all of a sudden they have a change in executive leadership. And now all of a sudden their philosophy about your role relative to them has changed and they don't want to employ you anymore and you have to move 50 miles away. That is absolutely something we fight. So not all non-compete clauses and the purpose of their existence are the same. And there's some that can be defended and some that shouldn't be defended. And then finally, residency groups, as it relates to sort of private funding of residency groups, I put a link in there about what the American Medical Association did in the wake of Autonomy, which is a residency program that just sort of went to crap because the investors decided to pull out. And we went in and we bailed out those residents and we found them places to match, right? And that's absolutely what we're standing up against, is that sort of misbehavior of that influence in graduate medical education. So a lot of the things that were highlighted there, we're working on.
Thanks, Dr. Mukkamala. I have something from me about from Vicky Norton. Can you basically asking why, and there's a history with corporate practice medicine, but why the American Medical Association doesn't support a national corporate practice of medicine prohibition. And I'm not entirely sure if they explicitly do not. So I'm making that assumption there. And then we have a couple other physicians here with us, and I know we got about 10 minutes. So let me move to Dr. McNamara, and then I want to make sure that Dr. Aiken and Fernandez get involved here.
Yeah, I mean, the New York Times article came out today. Medicine it's getting devastated by private equity. One would hope that the organizations that are supposed to represent physicians first would, not do this stuff that we want to investigate, we want to see, and just stand up and say the principle of lay ownership of medical practices is not in the best interest of the patients, secondarily not in the best interest of the physicians. So this is, again, you're representing the organization, there's policies, but this is why the ASAP is losing membership. This is why the AM was created. This is why so many people are flocking to take medicine back. It is a lack of leadership from those who are supposed to be protecting our interests and letting us essentially be pillaged by private equity interests. Like, well, we need to research it more. We need to explore more. I've heard these same things before when I tried to get the ASAP to reform. And it is just a disingenuous message. We are doctors. We are supposed to put patients first. And we're not doing that. We're making excuses. We swear an oath to the patient, and the patients are being hurt. And I know you can't treat it yourself, but to me, I think that's the frustrations that's going on here. I'll continue to pay my AM dues, but if anybody says I'm not, I'm gonna say, I know why you're not doing it. I know why you don't want to join ASAP. I know why you're leaving in 45 when you're dropping out of emergency medicine because you don't want to be, put in these situations. And it's a tragedy. We've allowed medicine to slip into the control of lay people. Where's the stance against Optum, an insurer owning the most physicians in the country? Where is my AMA dues hours going to that? There's nothing. It's nothing. There should be a lawsuit. There should be state by state corporate practice of medicine things going on, and again, it's just, I've been seeing it a long time, and I watch my residents walking out into a world where I say today, we teach them the ethics, the patient is first, and then they run into the buzzsaw and they burn out, they leave, the patient suffer, the doctor suffers, and so does their family. And I'm up on a soapbox again, sorry.
Yeah, I'll just mention where's the AMA as it relates to some of those things that you mentioned as far as Optum, for example, right? So we have a litigation center at the AMA that fights these things, but the battlefield for correcting those wrongs is not in a press release from the AMA, right? That's something that happens in courts and goes all the way through the court system to the Supreme Court, probably in that sort of instance. And so that is why we invest in our litigation center that literally fights all of these battles, from scope issues to corporate influence on medicine to inappropriate practices related to insurance companies as it relates to prior authorizations to medical malpractice, the whole gamut of things where medicine intersects with the law and scope of practice, and also the litigation center. That's exactly why we fund it, so that we can be present on that battlefield, which is in courtrooms, not in press releases. And we have plenty of press releases. It says a press release would be a start, though. I mean, I put a bunch of links already in there about our content and our opinions on a lot of these issues. And I'll just highlight right now, if you go to the AMA webpage, what we're talking about is one aspect of medical care. But scope of practice is another one. Physician burnout, 60% of physicians are describing some level of burnout. That is a cause of why they seek solutions, private equity partnership being one of them. And sometimes it's misguided, and that's kind of come out here. Prior authorization, that 1.4 FTEs. Medicare pay, if you look at what Medicare has paid hospitals over the course of the past 20 years, that graph looks like this. If you look at what they paid physicians, that graph looks like this, not even kept up with inflation. And so these are the kind of things that make us a multidimensional organization in what we're addressing. And so when somebody says, I want to drop because you're supporting private equity, one, we're not supporting private equity. Two, we're fighting 10 other battles that help you to practice.
We got about 6 minutes left, I think, for Dr. Mukkamala. I have to make this quick because you know how all the alternative practitioners out there say we're not featuring or fixing the root cause of the disease. I feel like they're right in this case. When we talk about scope creep and burnout, we're avoiding the elephant in the room, which is this corporatization that results in this moral injury and an incentive to replace physicians with non-physician practitioners. But let me move this over to Dr. Aiken and Dr. Fernandez. And I think there was a good transition because you had mentioned support of private practice, of private practice, which is more difficult these days. And I think there's a couple considerations that differ between practice styles. You as a ear, nose, throat surgeon, and then primary care. And then there's also hospital-based specialties like emergency medicine, hospitalists, and anesthesia. So if I can turn it over, Dr. Fernandez looks like he's ready to go. And I know he has got a background with supporting those independent practices. And talk about the challenges.
Hi, thank you. Dr. Mukkamala, I appreciate you being here. I think I did reach out to him a few months ago when he actually wrote an article speaking against private equity, and I emailed him and he responded immediately. And I think it was a very good interaction and good conversation initially. And I learned that there were initiatives within the AMA. And I decided at that point that I was going to try to get involved as much as possible within the AMA because they've been around for a long time. And I realized that a lot of legislators, when you talk to them, their first question is going to be, what does the AMA think? And they have a ton of resources. And folks in this summit represent over 90,000 physicians. So I'm very proud to be part of this, but I also think that the AMA needs to figure out a way to kind of bring us all together. When we lost contracts to private equity, it was an executive officer from my national society that took one of our contracts. And I was livid. And I could not think of how this could happen under the watchful eye of the AMA and my national society, how private practices are being eviscerated, especially in our market here in Illinois. And right now we're in two very difficult contract negotiations where we're being bullied and they want to take away our autonomy all because of money. And they're going to change our practices and replace us with non-physicians. But through my experience, to me, the only way we can really impact the most change is if we come all together. There's a lot of great groups here that are doing a fantastic, phenomenal work, some great speakers, books being written. That's fantastic. We just have to figure out a way to find the common threads to bring us together as opposed to competing with each other. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Fernandez. I don't know if you have any comments, or I can go right to Dr. Aiken for a moment. And Dr. Aiken has the background as a direct primary care physician, which I think is just illustrates such a reset of medicine and autonomy as a private practice where the physicians control it.
Yeah, I'll just share two thoughts. And I really appreciate being a part of the conversation. I think even though it's at a small scale, in my own practice now, having hired 4 physicians who've all left the status quo system, taken notable pay cuts to join, and are notably happier and getting to deliver care in the way that they once dreamed of being able to deliver, that there are examples around the country of folks really trying to be the change that they want to see. I certainly hope to be a part of continuing to grow the movements. I think because of the lack of capital, or in our case, the lack of willing to take capital from one of these entities, our speed of growth is challenging in comparison to the corporate-backed players that are kind of going around saying that they are direct primary care as well, but are operated in a much more kind of streamlined PE style approach. And I think that will be interesting to see how that plays out as we move forward. The second comment that I will say, and appreciate Dr. Mukkamala being here and sharing his thoughts, is that ultimately, I think there is relevance for us to lean in and continue to try to shape entities like the AMA. I think part of why we really need that, and/or we really need to come together as providers, or basically all aspects of healthcare in terms of driving this change, is that the PE lobbies and the amount of money that they have, and these corporate interests and their influence in politics and policies and regulatory is immensely strong. And the amount of money, there's a kind of saying that goes around that it's a lot easier to make more money once you have a lot of money. And the venture and the private equity world has an insane amount of money, and they continue at making 15 to 20x on their money to far outpace the growth for entities that aren't in that space. And so the reality is we have to be aware that that is what we're up against. It doesn't mean that we can't overcome it. I actually think we can. We're incredibly smart as a collective body, and appreciate Mitch really bringing us together in this capacity as a start. And hopefully with Dr. Mukkamala's leadership and others like the AMA will continue to evolve towards really, I think, a lot of the things that we're speaking to here.
Thanks, Dr. Aiken. And I know we're right at 5:15, so let me give any final thoughts to Dr. Mukkamala, and we'll stick around for about 15 minutes afterwards and close out the summit today.
Thanks, Mitch. I've tried to keep up with some of the chat and putting some links in. There's a question about AMA getting big money from other entities. I put in there, our main source of revenue is our product CPT, that everybody that does something with a patient, whether that's a procedure or E&M code, that's all contained in that work product. Are there big entities outside the AMA that are invisible that are funding an agenda? Absolutely not. Right? I told you our policy is made by 600 some physicians. Whatever those 611 physicians this past year want to be the work of the AMA becomes the work of the AMA. And so this is one of those things that there are physicians on multiple sides of this issue, right? There is not a majority, it's not a universal opinion as it relates to private equity. these physicians are the ones that come to our meetings and create the policy of how we should approach this. And right now we are in a place that say these are the characteristics that could make for a constructive relationship with a private equity firm. And these are the things to look out for and would be destructive. And putting that out there for our membership, this is what to consider and this is what to stay away from. These are the thought processes, things that might not have occurred to you. These are the resources that might give you another avenue to fund your practice and grow your practice without seeking that partner like our private practice work. This is all what we're putting out there. And that's our philosophy on how to approach this decision that physicians are facing all over the country right now. But I appreciate the opportunity for sure, because these conversations make me a smarter advocate for physicians.
And thanks for coming, Bobby.
everyone.
All right, thanks.
And
everybody.
we'll hopefully continue these conversations within the AMA itself, and really appreciate it. All right, I will remove the spotlight from Dr. Mukkamala, and I think we have a hard stop. Some of us have a hard stop at 5:30. So why don't we just go round table and go with reactions? I'm sorry we couldn't get to everybody's really good questions and really good discussion in the comments. You know, I do feel like there is a sort of a fundamental, this helped me figure out where the fundamental disagreement is with the American Medical Association stance, which is that they feel that we should maintain autonomy and clinical control over the practice, and also that the AMA doesn't support any of the negative outcomes of private equity, like replacing physicians with non-physician practitioners in an inappropriate amount, or gouging patients. But what seems to be missing to me is that that's the rule and not the exception, and that's the physics of private equity. And that's why we did a discussion on the pathophysiology of private equity, and broaden that a little bit further. When a lay company owns a physician group, it's there to make money off of that, and there's an inherent conflict there, and that seems to be missing from AMA discussion or policy.
Yeah, I mean, like, as I examined in some of the dermatology data, some of our publications and others, private equity likes dermatology because there's a lot of simple levers that can be pulled to generate profits. You do the simple act of extra biopsies, and if those extra biopsies are called skin cancers, they generate path codes, a technical code, a professional code, they generate procedural codes downstream. If you add the extenders to the mix and do more biopsies, that increases it more. So they like specialties that, especially right recently passed, procedural based, because it's very simple levers to pull, and it's very simple pathophysiology, but how to maximize your revenue. So that's why I find it difficult to believe, like, how much extra research do we need? We've already been a decade into this current wave of consolidation. We have to wait another decade, another 10 years, and then what? We wait till the damage is completely done. You know, so we already have great case studies. What happened in ER? You guys are several decades ahead of us. You know, we've seen the 1990s already. What happened? So how many times did you see it play out in different avenues to really take a stand on something? And that's the tough part. So
Yeah, Mitch, it's basically bullshit, right? To put it out there plainly. We make a statement, we don't think this should happen, but you know it's happening. Okay. This is the classic, and this is my frustration with the American College of Emergency Physicians. You know, we don't endorse any single form of practice. We don't do this. Our members, you know, need to be here, there. That is just evading your moral responsibility as a physician organization. Okay, that's all there is to it. That's what they're doing. They've created a space, a window for this. Oh, we're against this kind of stuff. And, you know, well, maybe, you know, but there are practices out there where it's okay. It's not. Like, this is clear. The evidence is clear. It's out there. Private equity, profits first, medicine, patients first. It doesn't belong here. They're not going to convince me any other way. This is, I think what I'm taking from this, and I've already known this, right? That, you know, take medicine back, AAEM, maybe we need a new derm society, a new anesthesia society. You getting Warren, getting, you know, the Senator Marshall, the reporters, the Rosemary Botts, the Gretchen Morgensons, you know, hopefully the tide will change, okay? And it's not going to happen through the AMA they got too much money coming in from other sources. I don't know if ASAP or the ASA or whatever, but like the only thing they're going to respond to is loss of membership. Okay. And like flat out public embarrassment. And, I don't know if Arthur Simonski's still on, but he's pretty unabashed. Why the hell would you give your money to an organization that won't stand up for physicians first? So it's, I credit him for coming. I am a long-standing AMA member and rose up to this board of trustees. They're part of, they're part of the problem, right? It's so obvious to us that this should not be here. And, we need to continue to be the advocates and the leaders of the world, the young physicians, the groundswell from there. This just tells me Take Medicine Back needs to continue to grow in its influence and to keep doing what it's doing. And, everybody who participated here deserves credit on that. And, we're having an effect, right? It's New York Times today, I'm talking to the Washington Post tomorrow because I read the New York Times. I don't know if this will ever eventually lead to change, but it's, I think the efforts to Take Medicine Back are commendable. But I feel like I'm beating my head against the wall when I talk to the big old groups in organized medicine. Why don't you get this? What are you? You forget that oath you swore when you stood up at medical school graduation. So, yeah.
Well said as always. And I wanted to point out, I do appreciate Dr. Mukkamala coming here because they easily could have said no. And he may be getting the most flack for just showing his face here. But I wanted to point out the American College of Emergency Physicians was invited here to speak as well. And they were unable to find a senior leader available. And, we may read into that how we will, but I wanted to point out that as of last year, the American College of Emergency Physicians actually did release an updated corporatization statement, and stating that the American College of Emergency Physicians is increasingly concerned about the expanding presence of private equity in corporate investment in healthcare, including in emergency medicine. And, we've been fighting that battle within emergency medicine, Dr. McNamara, for much longer than any of us. Yet that's more movement than I'm seeing at the American Medical Association. And that actually kind of surprised me.
Words mean nothing, actions do.
I think one thing to point out as a counter to what was shared from Bobby and the AMA opinion is that I think it's unrealistic to think that guidelines on how to negotiate a contract with a private equity that are posted on a website are going to actually be read and adopted and utilized in an effective mechanism by us as physicians, as practice owners, when we're looking at a check somewhere between $2 million and more dollars. One, our judgment's going to be a little bit clouded, just study some behavioral economics. And two, the sophistication with which the legal teams on the private equity side come to the table. It just, to me, it feels inevitable that actually the nature of the contract is going to be counter to what the AMA wants it to be. And so it just feels like you're putting forth this statement that is actually unrealistic in terms of its application, and kind of leaning on the statement as sufficient, when in reality, basically the opposite seems to happen. And it's just happening over and over again. And to Celeste's point earlier, the data at this point seems compelling. The number of studies that you put forth in your talk was striking to me. I had no idea that there were that many already out there, more just anecdotal in my own experience. And so it just feels like that we're far enough along, basically, where we're seeing this in reality and what's happening. And there should be enough there to say, hey, listen, we made this policy statement, but it's actually unrealistic in practice and we should change it.
Yeah. And even to the guidelines, ultimately people are selling because they want the millions of dollars. They're not going to care about all these other fine print things. They want to take the money and walk away in 3, 4, or 5 years. So you can put all the guidelines out there you want, but people that want the money are not going to take too much heed to it, essentially.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So just a couple of things to go back to Mukkamala. One of the things he said was that you had representatives from each established society that makes up the House of Delegates. I know that I'm sure all the reps for my society were all academics. not a lot of private practice representation there. So I could understand how they come up with some of this, but to me, that just gives me more motivation to actually get more involved within the AMA, because the people that I have spoken to at the private practice physician section and the practice sustainability section, they weren't aware of a lot of what's going on. So I'm an optimist. I'm naive. I'm going to continue trying to work up the chain of command and try to get more traction within the AMA as we continue to build our association for independent medicine and include other specialties, not just, I was talking to Eve Harrison earlier, we're going to try to include veterinarians as well. And we're including dentists, and we're going to try to continue to grow and build our relationship with everyone here. And we'll just keep moving forward.
I'm just excited that there's so many people that are willing to educate the residents and the young physicians, because they really need it. I saw multiple comments in there that ultimately, like, we just want a job, but we do want a safe job. So we need the people that, mess up our specialty, and those older people that are kind of ruining medicine to have their conscience and come back and help us, because it's scary.
Sorry, I had to throw that as a hashtag, those older people ruining medicine. And then okay, boomer, I think. Thank you guys for joining. I think I'll close. I don't have any big plenary speech or discussion, but something that really strikes me when the American Medical Association, maybe previously ASAP, has said we support all employment models, that really says, does that mean we extrapolate that? A lot of us taking the MCATs, and you extrapolate a question to almost an extreme to figure out, does this make sense? And we support all employment models. To me, means that they also could support indentured servitude, or an exploitative employment model, or one that is contrary to the duty of our profession. And so that is just inherently disingenuous. And I think that, the next step probably is continue the grassroots effort, but also maybe make these arguments at the American Medical Association in a way that hasn't been done before in front of essentially our peers, or maybe our peers who are leaving medicine.